Hello, I'm your host, Grayson Brulte. Welcome to another episode of SAE Tomorrow Today, a show about emerging technology and trends in mobility with leaders and innovators who make it all happen. On today's episode, we're absolutely honored to be joined by Tony Romeo, CEO Deep Sea Vision. On today's episode, we discuss the search for Amelia Earhart's lost plane and the future of ocean exploration. We hope you enjoy this episode. Tony, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. Nice to be here.
It's great to have you here. You have a thrill for adventure. You went on one heck of an adventure, and you decided to go on an adventure to search for Amelia Earhart's aircraft. Why?
It's a great question. I'll tell you what, it's a story that's fascinated me since I was just a little child. My dad flew for Pan Am for almost 45 years. And he worked for the same company, by the way, that Fred Noonan, her navigator, flew for, Pan Am. He started just a few years after they disappeared. So this is a story I heard a lot about growing up. My brothers and I all had our pilot's license. My sister had a pilot's license. My sister was a teacher at the Air Force Academy, her brother. So it's definitely an aviation family. I love mysteries like this, and airplane mysteries have their own sort of cachet right there, especially when it involves the oceans. They disappear, and then you have all the stories that kind of follow along with it. And so growing up, story I heard a lot about. I went to the Air Force Academy, continued to hear about aviation stories and this one. And, later in life, my brothers and I kind of reconvened on this. My dad had passed away a few years ago, but we still found this fascinating. We said, why is this one 87 years on? Why has this riddle not been figured out yet? And we took a look at the evidence, and we took a look at everything that was known about her disappearance. We said, really isn't a matter of finding her necessarily. It's really the difficulty of where she's at. If this had been Lake Michigan, she would have been found years ago, right? I mean, this is the most remote place on the planet. You probably maybe come up with a place in the middle of the Amazon, but you're in the middle of the Pacific, 3 days from anything by boat. No planes fly over this area of the world. And it's, just super difficult and extremely challenging to mount an expedition to go out there. So for us, we found that was really what was going on here.
So the desire comes from growing up. You were in the Air Force. But where does the ocean exploration come from? Did you have another relative, or were you exposed to, maybe had a friend in the Navy that exposed you to ocean exploration?
No, it was really I'm kind of a newcomer. In fact, the name of our documentary is Why Not Us? Why can't five guys, my brothers and I, no experience on the oceans, come to solve something like this or make this kind of discovery. And the one thing we kind of found out, we're kind of looking at doing an MH370 search possibly later this year, is that the two are kind of very closely intertwined, the oceans and aviation. If there's an accident in one, in aviation, typically or often it will involve the ocean. So yeah, this was my first time being out on a boat for 100 days. Some of the guys got really sick out there. I had a really tough time with it. But yeah, no, I've actually turned out I really enjoy. I grew a beard because I guess I'm a mariner now, like you. So I really enjoy it out there. It was very peaceful. I mean, being out in the ocean, I didn't know how to handle it, but really enjoyed it.
How did you narrow in? The ocean is vast and wide. How did you narrow in your search area when you were going through the planning process?
Yeah, great question. So the last thing we ever heard Amelia tell the world, her last words were on the line 157337. And, she made a lot of radio calls coming up into that, and they weren't recorded. They were written down by a radio operator on the Itasca waiting to meet her. And as she's flying in, she's making these calls. And, you can put different importance on different messages that she's saying. But the very last word she says is, I'm on the line 157337, which is a bearing, a heading, going north, 337, going south, 157. So she's on that line. She's referencing the island. So it's a line that goes through that island. And so we know, based on that last information, on more or less where she's at. If we take that as the most important piece of evidence of everything, and you just kind of work from there. And, you factor in the winds. Did she know what the winds were? Did she know, were there other bits of information, like possibly the date length there? We can talk about that a little bit, that impacted her ability to navigate to the island. So that's your starting point. And then from there, you just kind of start drawing circles around islands. Okay, if she was this close, then we know she would have seen the islands. So she would have gone there. If she was within 20 miles of the Itasca, which is the boat that was waiting to to meet her. It was pumping smoke in the air so that she would see it. If she was within 20 miles of that, you would see it. So you can draw a circle of area that you don't need to search there. Then you have Baker Island, which is nearby. You can draw a nice ring of area around there that you don't need to search. So, then you end up with kind of a grid of area that you could say is, a likely possibilities. And then you assign probabilities based on different sectors.
From the probability aspect, what role do the currents play in your search? Because the currents could move it, and sands could change over time. What role do currents play? Not
very much at all. The one thing we really had to confront was whether or not when she impacted the water, did she stay afloat or did she sink right away? So your question is right at the heart of that. If she stayed afloat, which some people say she may have because she had these large empty fuel tanks at this point that would kept her basically buoyant on the surface, then the currents and even possibly the winds that were blowing from the east, everything was going east to west, could have pushed her some distance. We don't think that that's kind of what happened. We think that she sank pretty quickly. The plane was very nose heavy. In other words, the center of gravity was very far forward on the aircraft. It would have tipped over. If she landed it flat, it would have tipped over very quickly. No engines down, tail of the plane sticking out of the water, and then the hatch and all the openings would have started filling. It would have taken maybe 30 minutes. And, if that current out there is moving at 2 to 3 to 4 knots an hour, you're looking at maybe, a shift in position of maybe a mile. Not much.
What type of depth are we talking?
5,000 meters, 15,000 feet.
Wow. And let's say, for example, the aircraft is going down. Does it generally move at all, or does it stay pretty consistent when it's making its downward trajectory?
I think the way that it goes down towards the seafloor is going to be very similar to how it would crash if it was coming down to the earth in the air. The aerodynamics are similar. Fluid is fluid, whether it's air or water. So it probably is going to spiral. It could glide straight ahead, but it likely will spiral down towards there's probably some damage on impact from the ocean. So maybe the tail of the plane, maybe some of the wings, maybe the flaps got ripped off. Undoubtedly something's damaged or bent. So you're going to see the aircraft actually spiral towards the seafloor. And you're right. So you mentioned the currents, which we can't predict that. We don't know how long it would have stayed afloat. So you got to just take that as a variable you don't know. And then how does it behave underwater as it's sinking towards the seafloor? You're absolutely right. There's no way you can predict that as well.
When you're doing your homework or your research prior to going out on your exploration, what went into that? Were you looking at historical nautical maps? Are you looking at currents? Are you looking at winds? Are you reading any historical documents that you can get to try and build your circumference of where you're going to search?
Yeah, I think there's a nice body of knowledge out there, and the community around Amelia is super. Everybody sort of wants to find the plane and bring some closure to this and have a few answers. And so a lot of this is just public information. We've offered some of our data out there for other folks to build on. If it turns out we didn't find it, then we will be the biggest cheerleaders for the next group. So, I think that for us, her radio calls as she's coming into the island, she makes 6 of them in sequence over the course of about 2.5 hours. And those radio calls for us were sort of the starting point. There's a lot of other information out there, that's sort of been debunked, like the post-loss signals. Were there radio calls made after she hit her last radio call? For example, that she's radioing a position on an island or other information, or is she a picture of her sitting on a dock in Saipan in the Marshall Islands, supposedly maybe captured by the Japanese, but a lot of that stuff is just oral history, and I don't put a lot of credence in oral history. It can be interesting, but it's hearsay. It can be very misleading and often and almost always inaccurate.
You have the sonar images that you've publicly displayed of which we believe to be the Amelia Earhart aircraft. Will you go back and then go with a human submersible with an expert or an individual from an NGO to verify that is indeed her aircraft?
We will. Yeah. So but probably not a human submersible like the Titan. Everyone's kind of got that on the top of their mind, but there's really, as far as I know, we've looked into this, there's none available to go down that deep. There is one, the Deep Sea Challenger, and then there's one that Victor Vescova had, but those aren't available. I think what we do is we put cameras on an ROV, and I think we go down and we film it from lots of different angles. And, I think this is a perfect The content of this, the subject matter is perfect for an IMAX. You've got big oceans, big, just viscerally is very aesthetically just very beautiful and immense and expansive. So you go down there, you got 6,000 feet down, and you've got new things, all kinds of new things to look at. So I think not just a plane, but new sea life, biology, and seafloor terrain to look at. So yeah, what we're planning to do is use an ROV, but I think we could also take pictures with our AUV as well if we needed to.
Now you've got the makings of a James Cameron movie. That's much how you're summarizing that. Is it, since this is such a, let's call it, historical significant plane, and it's a global historical plane, do you have to get samples from the plane or some sort of physical material to verify, or could this all be done through camera technology?
Yeah, I think camera is going to be enough. First of all, there's very few of these that have crashed in the ocean. There's, I think, 6 or 7 of this model plane that have been lost over the years. None in this area, and certainly none that no twin engine or twin vertical stabilizer planes that you see in the sonar image. So it's very likely a plane, and if it is, it's most likely going to be hers. It's possible it could be a plane of a Japanese plane, or some folks have suggested some other planes that had a similar kind of architecture, but a lot of those planes weren't launched from, to get to this point in the ocean, you have to be you have to take off from either an aircraft carrier or an island nearby, and I say nearby, within 500 or 600 miles. And most of those planes just didn't have the endurance to do that. So, what other kind of plane could it be? I mean, she had 6 fuel tanks. I remember 6 or 8, 6 extra fuel tanks on the plane, or I think it was 6 total and 3 extra, or something like that. But she had extra fuel tanks custom fitted to put inside the plane so that she could even get out that far. So for this to be any other plane other than hers would be very unlikely.
What do you believe, and your colleague scientists believe, the condition of the plane to be in today?
Yeah, we think it'll be in good shape. At 6,000 meters, 6,000 meters below the surface, you have an environment that's very stable. There's low light. The water is near freezing, just slightly above 32 degrees. Very little movement, so you don't get the friction or erosion forces from you get right on like, say, a coastline. And so you have an aircraft that's going to be preserved very well, and it's not going to oxidize, and a lot of free oxygen at that depth. And in fact, it could be so well preserved that inside the plane, remember Fred and Amelia couldn't hear each other. The engines were so loud. This is before intercoms in the planes. So they were writing notes back and forth to each other, scribbling on little pieces of paper. And she would put it on like a fishing line, and she'd pull the line. He was sitting in the back of the plane. He'd read the note, write down whatever his thing is, and he'd clip it to the fishing pole line, and he'd pull it back up, and she'd read it. That was how they communicated. Those notes should be still preserved, or could still be preserved, very likely inside of the cockpit of the plane. When they pulled up the Titanic, a lot of things from the Titanic, they found newspapers that were still, some papers that were still legible. So we hope that we can find a lot of the maps and charts that Fred was using when he was planning his mission, maybe even see possibly where the mistake happened.
That would be a game-changing element. Let's say, hypothetically, that it is verified by international NGO that this is indeed her plane. What happens? Does the Earhart estate step in, or who takes over and manages the process?
Yeah, so that's there's a lot to that. First of all, we want to make sure the plane is lifted properly and well, so it's not damaged. We don't want one bolt to fall off this plane. Everything needs to be done, engineered. The solution to bring it up needs to be done by experts. We need to have the right equipment. And I think everybody agrees, regardless of who ends up ultimately owning the airplane, it belongs in the Smithsonian. And the Earhart family, even Purdue, who gave this to her, I think they'd like to see it as an exhibit at the Purdue University, and I would support that. But I think everybody believes that this belongs in the Smithsonian. In the spring, this coming spring, the Smithsonian is opening up a special exhibit with her Lockheed Vega plane, the red plane that she flew across the Atlantic as the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic. So that'll be a nice, obviously we won't have it up by then, but it's nice to see the Smithsonian dedicating a little bit of space for her, and certainly think that this plane would be a nice addition right next to it.
What do you think captured, or why did she capture not just America's, but the world's imagination? She's obviously by far the world's most iconic female aviator, if not the world's most famous aviator, period. Why do you think she captivated the world so the way she did.
Yeah, I'd even go a bit further and say she's the most iconic female perhaps in history. I think it'd be hard pressed to find someone that more people could identify with just a photograph. She was endearing on so many levels. She was charismatic. She was gracious. She's a little known fact about her. She was a terrific author. I started those things. I've got all her books and read them, just kind of expecting it to be just an average sort of read. And turned out the one of the books she wrote for the fun of it was one of my favorite books I've ever read. I mean, she's just so witty and just so clever, and she never says anything bad about anybody, but when she doesn't like someone, right? I mean, she's just so good at her writing, and so far ahead of her time. And look, she was, I think, the Instagrammer, the first influencer. She knew how to pose. She knew how to take pictures. She knew what to say. She was terrific, and she was great at publicity. And this was a publicity event for her, flying around the world. I mean, this was a business for her. This is not, this wasn't just it was fun, but this was kind of her livelihood. So she knew how to grab headlines, and so for her to just vanish just like that one day out of nowhere, just unthinkable.
You hear these stories for years, and sailor friends, and the Bermuda Triangle. Well, the boat went into the Bermuda Triangle, the plane went, and it came back. And look at the Bermuda Triangle has captured the world's imagination the same way she's captured the world's imagination. I'm curious to bring the plane up. I'm going back into oceanography, so I'm sorry about that, but how do the pressure, when you're going through different levels of going from the bottom to the surface, you're going through different levels of pressure. Do you have to build a special device to put the plane in and bring it up? Almost I'll use the term an iron lung, that you can dictate the pressure as you bring the aircraft to the surface?
So as soon as the plane fills with water, it equalizes, which will happen probably about 20, 30 feet down, right? All the air is kind of, just bubbles out of the plane. It's sinking and once you've got water from the inside pushing at the same pressure as the water pushing from the other side, some of the forums and, comments and in different articles, folks have asked that, isn't this thing going to explode or implode like the Titan did? It would if it had stayed full of water. Her plane was not designed to stay pressurized and keep the water out. It would have filled with water. The moment it fills with water, you could take it down to 100,000 feet. It doesn't make any difference. The pressure is the same on the inside pushing as the outside.
That's fascinating. To find it used a modified Hugin 6000 underwater autonomous drone. What modifications did you make to that drone?
So I hired the guy that built the Hugin in Norway. So we bought it. We went out there. It was a very sensitive piece of equipment. It was hard to get. Norway would barely even release it to us. I was even interviewed by the FBI as to why I wanted to buy this thing. It's military grade equipment, and in the end, they eventually released it. But as part of the purchase, when I went out to Norway, I, serendipitously ran into, while we were out at a bar one night having a drink, the guy that builds this thing. He'd been at Kongsberg almost 20 years. And, we started chatting about finding Amelia, and he was just so captivated by the story. I said, why don't you join me? We're going to build a business out of this. And he did. And a few days later, he told Kongsberg he was putting in his papers, and he joined me on the expedition. So that was Craig Wallace. And what he did, he back up just a little bit further, he had entered the X Prize a few years earlier to help design a sonar scan that could help with the MH370 search, be able to search faster and wider. And he won that X Prize competition. So he took that knowledge and brought that in with us, and with some help from Kongsberg and some other folks, we were able to really modify this thing to search about a mile wide. Now, you're not getting the resolution. You can see that from the sonar image. You're not getting the resolution that you would like on a really close up scan, but it does. It'll trigger a target if there's one there. And when you're on completely flat sandy bottom, if there's something like this sticking above the sand, it immediately stands out.
We'll use the same drone, but this time modify it for high resolution cameras to send it back to the site?
That's it. That's right.
Wow. And how are the cameras going to take the pressure? Do you have to build a specialized housing, or what does that look like?
That's it. That's right. Yeah, it's like a $300,000 camera. It's just a simple camera, but it's all the housing and seals and cables that connect it. And actually ours broke, and that was part of the reason why we didn't go back once we found it to go take pictures. We were trying to get a replacement. We just got it replaced about a few weeks ago. But yeah, that's all the components on that AUV are under a ton of. It's like a 747 on every square inch of surface down there. So it's immense. So where you've got components that are some components, like I said, like glass or steel. It's just once it equalizes, pushing. It's not anything that has air to it. Like for example, a styrofoam cup, easy one, or rubber. You've got air bubbles. It goes down to that depth and it's going to get squeezed, and it better be able to tolerate those pressures. Otherwise, you're going to, the cables, for example, are going to get ruined, and they're not obviously going to be able to work.
Can you take the same technology that you developed to find your plane to go find? I'll give you an old school one, Blackbeard, those old famous pirate galleons. Can you use that same technology if you wanted to basically be a pirate hunter and go look for those galleons?
100%. Absolutely. Yeah, I'd go after Blackbeard. I think that one was found off North Carolina a few years, is that 2015 or something?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that one, but there's a few galleons. There's the Royal Merchant. That's one of the biggest known bullions out there on a merchant ship that has not been found. Of course, the San Jose, that one's got something like 30 billion. That one's been in the news. The Colombian government's announced that they're going to go after it. But I don't know. I'm more interested in the aviation mysteries. The MH370 has got our attention right now. Flight 19, the disappearance of 5 Avenger planes off the coast of Florida, just seemingly in formation, just got caught in weather, disoriented, and all 5 planes crashed in the in the Bermuda Triangle. And there's a few others that are probably a little less well known, but the aviation ones are interesting because you have a black box. There's sort of this recorded hit, not in the Avengers actually, but obviously MH370. There's going to be a black box, and we'll be able to unwind that story in a way that you don't really ever get to do sometimes with these really, really old shipwrecks.
It's interesting because I believe, if I remember correctly, that was the Malaysian. Was that the Malaysian flight that disappeared?
That's right. The MH370. That's right. Yep.
If you look at this is based on news articles, the area that it was apparently disappeared was in the middle of nowhere again. It seems like that's an area where you can succeed and thrive. Yeah, Indian Ocean
is that's a difficult one because it's southern Indian Ocean. We were central Pacific, where it was really very kind of stable weather. Waves never maybe 8 feet, 10 feet, maybe most is what we saw. Indian Ocean, you're going to see 6-8 meter swells pretty consistently. Get your patches ready. You put them behind your ear. That helps you with the seasickness. But it's a different ocean out there, and seemingly it feels like that's what he was aiming for. And I say he, the pilot here, that it was really the criminal. I mean, he mass murderer that diverted the plane into the Indian Ocean and killed 238 other people. So I think he was trying to. It looks like he was trying to plant the plane in a place that was very difficult to get to, and it would be very difficult to search. If that's not the reason, it's just it's hard to say why he picked that area of the ocean to target.
When you're doing the ocean exploration, obviously there's volcanoes under the ocean. There's different, I'll call them mountain ranges because they are basically mountain ranges. I forget the one that's almost taller than Everest, where the terrain is rocky and moves under the ground. Does that make it harder? Where if you look at, you're in the Pacific Ocean, you mentioned flatter bottom, where other parts of the ocean have rocky terrain. Does that make it harder to find these aircrafts?
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah, the flat terrain is much easier. You can go faster. You hit that rocky stuff, volcanic activity. Yeah, it slows you down a lot. Now, I mean, man-made objects. There's we've got some tools that kind of help us pick out man-made objects, but straight lines, circles, those are things that are kind of help you read a sonar image.
Are you building a data set or building some machine learning where you can identify, you teach it, this is, let's say, aircraft, this is mountain range, this is underwater deep sea creature, don't know what that is?
No, it's a good idea. We've talked about it. I don't know if there's necessarily a huge market for something like that other than our own use. But yeah, I mean, certainly for aircraft recoveries and things like that, it's useful.
In your opinion, what does the future of underwater exploration look like, and what role do you want deep sea to play in it?
So we got into it really to get into the deep sea mineral space. That's why part of the reason why I bought the equipment, in addition to finding Amelia and some other projects. But we're in the Pacific, which is just now starting to really get going with the deep sea minerals. And, a lot of folks don't know this, but just sitting on the seafloor is trillions of these softball-sized objects that are, they're just sitting on the seafloor, and they're rich in cobalt, magnesium, and copper, other rare earth minerals. And, basically just need to be picked up, sucked to the surface, put into a cargo ship, and then smelted down for their mineral content. And the effects, or I should say the sustainability, the amount of resources this can give us is immense, especially as we move from carbon to storage, right? Carbon to battery storage. And there's going to be this huge shortfall of rare earth minerals like lithium and cobalt and magnesium. And the bottom of the ocean can be a huge, huge source of that if we do it right. We don't, go in and destroy habitats and ecosystems. We can. I mean, there's enough energy down there to sustain a couple hundred years of human civilization. So we're in the early stages of that. We want to help with the mapping. We want to help with doing this properly, surveying it, and exploring how much is at the bottom of the ocean.
It's interesting that I met a gentleman years ago. He ended up selling his company to Ray Diallo. He was a submarine company. He ended up selling it to Ray Diallo. And the gentleman was super interesting, very nice gentleman. He said, I don't understand why the fascination of space, but yet there's not all this exploration money going into the ocean. And he laid out this clear case for what's under there and explained that we really don't know. It'd be fascinating to see what you and your colleagues in ocean exploration uncover in the years, and we wish you the best on the Amelia Earhart journey. And it does belong to Smithsonian. I think that would be really great for our children to learn that history and to see what you're able to uncover with your colleagues. Tony, for today, as we look to wrap up this insightful conversation, what would you like our listeners to take away with them?
Just how great of a person Amelia was, how fascinating a story this is. I hope when we find the plane, we confirm this is a plane, we can, the conversation's always been, or often is, about the disappearance and what happened. And maybe once we find that and close the chapter on that, the conversation moves to all the great things she did during her lifetime, the books she wrote, and the early pioneer in aviation and women's rights. So, but I think that, I think the oceans are a fascinating place. They're full of stories. And I go and give talks at some schools every now and then, and the excitement around the oceans and just the life and that's in there and the mystery of it is just, it's so fun to watch. And there's so many different careers out there in the oceans. I had no idea about this until I got involved in the Amelia Earhart stuff, but the oceans they just fascinate me. And hopefully this motivates and inspires other people to get involved and look at careers in marine biology as well.
The ocean's wonderful. The seven seas have a lot of mystery. What Tony and Deep Sea are doing, they're starting to uncover those mysteries. Today is tomorrow. Tomorrow is today. The future is ocean exploration. Tony, thank you so much for coming on SAE Tomorrow Today.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you for listening to SAE Tomorrow Today. If you've enjoyed this episode and would like to hear more, please kindly rate, review, and let us know what topics you'd like for us to explore next. Be sure to join us next week as we explore friction points for AV deployments.
SAE International makes no representations as to the accuracy of the information presented in this podcast. The information and opinions are for general information only. SAE International does not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast.